Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer. In this video, we're going through January. How many books did I read? What genres? What were my top 3 books for the month? My least favourite books for the month? And 2 books, well in this case 3 books, that I thought were great reads but just didn't make the top 3. It's the first time on this channel that I'll have a full calendar year of reading. So when I started this channel, it was partway through last year. So now I'm in January, the first month of 2023, and I'm looking forward to the whole 12 months of this calendar year. I don't have a reading plan for the year. I try to do reading plans and then it fails. I think I'm more of a random reader. I gather books and then just read what I feel like at the time. Sometimes I get a book and it jumps to the front of my queue straight away. Sometimes books linger, and sometimes linger for years sometimes before I get around to reading them. That's terrible, I know, but it happens because there's just so many books out there to read. I can't get to them all when I want to. So I'm not going to do a plan for the year. I hope during the year that I'll finish some series that I've started. That's my loose plan. But anyway, let's jump into January. So how many books did I read in January? I read 25 books. How many books in each genre? Let's go through them one by one. Romance, 3 books. Fantasy, 4 books. Mystery, 3 books. Cozy mystery, 3 books. Horror, 3 books. General fiction, 3 books. Action, 1 book. And thriller, 5 books. You can see a whole range of different genres. I think 8 genres in total, but if you put cozy mysteries and mysteries together, it's 7. But I like to separate them because cozy mysteries have a whole different feel than normal mysteries. What were my top 3 books for January? The first is Wake by Shelley Burr. I so enjoyed this book. It is such a good read. It's a mystery. It's described as Australian noir. I think of it as just a great mystery. It's set in a small country town in Australia, but the characters, the setting, just the writing, everything about this is just wonderful. The whole story feels so well thought out and well planned. The characters feel very real. So basically it's a mystery about a cold case. So a girl was abducted from her bedroom 19 years ago, and she's a twin, and her twin sister is still around. And that's very, very interesting because the twin sister lives in the same house still. So she went up to university and she's come back, and it's a huge farm. So her parents had a huge farm and she lives in the house, which is quite large, but even though she's got all this space around her, she isolates herself from life mostly. She tries to. She ventures out when she has to get groceries, to go to the library. There's little things like that. But for most of her life, she shuts herself in. But then a PI comes into town and he wants to solve this cold case. He's been doing it for the last few years and it seems like a special skill for him. But he's got his own motives to solving this case as well, and they go back to his history. And we learn more about him as this story progresses. But I just found the mystery was dealt with so well in this book. The author just gives us little bits through the book, peels back layers as the book goes on, and it's so skillful the way that's done. And there are twists and turns as this story unfolds. There are secrets people are trying to hide that do come out, and some of them are quite shocking. And this guy moves into this small town to solve this case and kind of shakes up the whole community in this small town. So a great book. I do recommend this. Shelley Burr, Wake. The next book is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, written by Benjamin Stevens. It's another Australian book, and I really enjoyed this as well. It's a mystery, but it feels like an old school mystery. It's very clever. It doesn't rely on tropes you find in kind of new thrillers and new mystery books. It relies on clever clues being hidden throughout the book, and clever characters, cleverly written characters, and the narration of this, so the voice of the character who's narrating this story, is very clever as well. I enjoyed this so much. It's set in a ski resort, And it's a small space. There's a small footprint used by the author for this book, and all the characters get snowed in. And it makes it more intriguing because you've got characters who are trapped in a small space, and you've got murders happening as well. So there are murders in this book that the characters are trying to solve, or the main character anyway. So it's kind of a cozy mystery because the main character is not in law enforcement, but it's just got such a really old style feel to the whole mystery, the way it's planned out, the way it's thought out. Everything about this is just wonderful. I love the characters. It's a whole range of different characters, and I just love the concept and the setup of this story as well. I do recommend this very much. Benjamin Stevens, Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. The next book is one of the Lockwood & Co books, and I've read these just recently, all 5 of them. But book 4, The Creeping Shadow, written by Jonathan Stroud, is my favourite of all the 5 books in the series, and it's one of my 3 favourites for January. I enjoyed this book very much, and the whole series, but this book especially, because what this book does, it just wraps up and brings together all different elements from books 1 to 3 in the series, then adds new elements that are going to continue on to book 5. And it's so cleverly written. There are so many things going on in this book, and the author manages to keep them all together very tightly, and there are no loose threads. Nothing falls to the wayside, and all the characters are written so well. There's suspense, intrigue, action, humour. There are so many things in this book, and the whole series as well. But in this book, everything just shines through so strongly, and it is the strongest book in the series in my opinion. If you like kind of fantasy with paranormal things going on, and it's set in London, so an alternate London, so a London and UK where there are ghost spirits. If you like that kind of thing where it's fantasy but in modern times, then grab this series and give it a go. I think it's also on Netflix as a series, and I've watched a few of those, and that came out just recently as well on Netflix. But if you are into books like this, I do recommend it because this whole series is just wonderful. So what were the 3 books I liked the least in January? The first is There's Someone in Your House by Stephanie Perkins. The reason I picked this up to read is because of the movie on Netflix. I wanted to read the book before watching the movie. The book just isn't that great. There are things in the book that it just shouldn't be there, I don't think. And some things are focused on, and I wonder why they were. It seems a bit all over the place, and it seems just a bit helter-skelter, really. I just don't get some parts of the book. So basically, it's people are being murdered in quite a small town, and it causes a lot of paranoia, a lot of mistrust, suspicion, especially in kids at the school, because the people being murdered seem to be high school kids. So, people are watching each other. There's a curfew in the town. It feels a bit like Scream in that way. So it has some Scream vibes going on in the book. But the main character, there's a focus on the main character about her past, something in her past that was horrible, and it's meant to relate to this crime spree happening. When we learn about what happened in the past, one, it's not that horrible after all. I mean, it is shocking, but I don't think what happened to her in the past would be the result of what happened in real life. But putting that aside, it doesn't relate to the modern crime spree or the crime spree in the present day timeline. There's no relation to it at all. So this huge build-up about this main character's past, and it's built up and built up all through the book, and it has no relevance to the rest of the story. So that was disappointing. And just the way it's presented, just the way it's written, it's more of a romance than a horror or a thriller or anything else. So the author focuses on the romance more, and the horror elements are pushed to the side a bit. The best horror element in the book was at the very start, with an egg timer. That was very creepy and so well written, and if the rest of the book had been like that, it would have been a great book. But it wasn't. And that egg timer thing didn't appear again in the rest of the book. So when the killer was going around later on in the book, and there are more murders happening, the egg timer is not there. So the creepiest part of the book appears once, at the very start, and then it's gone forever. The second is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. I have not seen any of the movies, and it's the first time I've read the first book in the series, and I've not yet read any more in the series. I do plan to read them all, just so I can say I've read them. Just so my opinion will be informed. Because, you go through life with some of these books that you hear a lot about, and you form an opinion. But can you really have an opinion on what they're like if you haven't read them? So I decided to read this, and it just didn't fill me with joy. It wasn't a great book. There are many, many things in this book that don't make sense. Some dialogue, some of the characters, the way they act, some of the events in the book. There are so many things that just don't make sense and just seem a bit of a mess. So overall, it's not a great book. There are a couple of things that were better in the book, and that was like introduction of people in the reservation and what that means in the series, and also an outside threat. And they're better because they take away from this really weird romance going on between Bella and Edward. And I say weird because of the way it's written in the book. The way the romance is presented in the book is very strange, especially with the dialogue and the way they act with each other. That just seemed odd and too strange. And when I was reading it, I just thought, how can people think it's a well-written romance? I mean, where does that come from? So overall, not a great book. If you want to read it, go read it. No one's going to stop you. And if you've already read it and you're going to have an opinion whether you loved it or not, I don't know. But I didn't love it. But I am going to read the rest of the series. I don't know if that means that the series improves as it goes on, but we'll see. Flight 171, written by Amy Christine Parker. This is a young adult thriller, I guess, with horror elements as well. So it could have been a great book because the concept is pretty good, but the way it's written just wasn't great. So basically it's about a group of kids going on a school trip and they're going on a flight. The main character's sister was hit by a car maybe I think 8 months or so before this storyline in the book, and she did die. And the surviving sister, carries around a lot of guilt about that. But she deals with that by trying to become her sister. So she started to wear her sister's clothes, so dress like her sister, do her hair like her sister used to do, be friends with her sister's friends. So she's adopting her sister's whole persona. And that's how she's dealing with her feelings about her sister's death. And that was quite strange. But then on the plane, there's this strange lady, and we learn more about this strange lady as the book goes on. And that's where the horror part starts in the book. There are some tense moments in the book, so I'm not going to lie, there are some well-written moments, but they're few and far between. But the characters, especially the main character, is just, I think, a bit of a mess, a bit all over the place. So while I thought the horror elements were okay, there is a lot of repetition in the book as well, and when it repeats a few times, that gets a bit tiring. So the author has a small footprint to use, being the plane. She used the space well for some of the book, but it's just that repetition in the story as well, and it strips away some of the suspense and tension and even some of the horror elements going on, because after a while it loses that, I guess, shock value, because it's just the same thing going on over and over again in the story. So I thought the concept was good, overall concept, but just the execution of the book let it down a lot. What were the books that I think are worthy of a mention that just missed out on the top 3? There are 2 more books from the Lockwood & Co. series, The Hollow Boy and The Empty Grave, both by Jonathan Stroud. These books are really worthy of a mention because they just missed out on the top 3. I mean, they are really great books. And Empty Grave is the last book in the series, book 5. And The Hollow Boy, I think it's book 3. They are very well written. I mean, Jonathan Stroud just seems to be a master of mixing different elements in a story and making them all work. It's my opinion that this author planned all 5 books before he started writing them. They have that feel because there are so many things from early on in the series that still play out later on in the series, and some elements are finished off in later books, some keep going, and some merge a bit and get a life of their own again. It's very clever, and the characters, the action, the paranormal stuff going on as well, the humour in it, because these series and these books have a lot of humour, and the way the characters are developed and written in this series, especially as the books go on, they feel like real people. When they're speaking to each other and you read their dialogue, it feels like you're there watching them and listening to them, and they just feel like they know each other so well. It's a very comfortable feeling when you see their dialogue in the books. I really enjoy this series as a whole, and I wish that every book could have made the top 3, but there were some great books during the month I read as well. But this series, I think, as a whole, is one of the best young adult series that I've read. The next is The Islands by Emil Brugman. It's an Australian book, and the action takes place in different locations in Australia. So it's the Canary Islands, I think, off the coast of Western Australia, and then in the suburbs of Perth, and then on the east coast of Australia in Sydney. This book is a really good example of an author using location as a character. Where our main characters are at different times in the book, they interact with the location in different ways, and each of them interacts with the location in very different ways sometimes. And you get a sense of this location they're in as being a character in the book and driving a lot of the story. I thought it was really well done, and the settings are described so well. I really enjoyed the different areas the author describes and draws for us in this book. Everything is so picturesque, and you can see it. It feels so real and vibrant, and the main characters are written very well. It's basically a family saga type book. It doesn't span generations, so it's more about, 2 parents and a child, but it spans, I think, probably about 40 years or so in their lives. So we see the child being born, growing up, and then being an adult and having a child of her own, and we see all different changes in these characters as they move from one part of Australia to another as well. So I think it's a special book. It's a debut book by the author, and I think it's very well written, and I think she uses location and space and characterization very well in this story. Quite a few books during the month, some really interesting books and great books, and I think there were 2 books with 5 stars. I mentioned both in this video, and that was Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone and Wake. I rated both books 5 stars. They're both top reads. Both Australian authors, but have very different feels to them, and both interestingly take place in settings that are kind of out of the middle of nowhere. They're smaller settings, but one being a small town in the country that's quite dry, and one being in a ski resort where people are snowed in, where there's a big storm. But both were great books, and I do recommend both very much. On my channel, I review many books from different genres. Check out my channel and subscribe. I'm sure there's something there you like.